Captain James Blackwood had served the Royal Guard for 12 years, but he had never felt the weight of responsibility as heavily as he did that crisp October morning, standing at attention outside Kensington Palace, his scarlet uniform pristine, and his bearskin hat perfectly positioned. He watched Prince Alexander prepare for what should have been a routine public appearance at the London Children's Hospital. The 22-year-old prince had always been different from his older siblings, where they followed protocol religiously. Alexander possessed a rebellious streak that both charmed the public and terrified his security detail. He insisted on walking among crowds without barriers, stopping to talk with children, and refusing the bulletproof vest that his protection officers repeatedly recommended. Blackwood had been specifically assigned to Prince Alexander 3 months ago, after the previous guard captain requested a transfer. The official reason was personality conflicts, but everyone knew the truth. Alexander's casual disregard for security protocols had driven the seasoned officer to near breakdown. The prince would disappear from secure locations, sneak out of official events to help homeless people he spotted on the street, and once famously climbed a tree to rescue a cat while wearing his formal military dress uniform. Captain Blackwood, Prince Alexander called out as he emerged from the palace's private quarters, adjusting his tie with one hand while texting on his phone with the other. Beautiful morning, isn't it? It's perfect for meeting some sick children and brightening their day. The prince's enthusiasm was genuine and infectious, but it also made Blackwood's job nearly impossible. Alexander saw his royal duties as opportunities to help people, not carefully choreographed public relations events. This fundamental difference in perspective had created tension between the prince and the entire palace security apparatus. "Your Royal Highness," Blackwood replied with a respectful bow, "the advance team has secured the hospital route, and Inspector Morrison will brief you on the schedule once we arrive." Alexander waved dismissively. "Oh, James, I don't pay attention to those schedules. I'll spend as much time as the children need. Some of them might not get another chance to meet someone who can bring them a bit of joy." This attitude, while admirable, gave Blackwood constant anxiety. Royal protection was about controlling variables, managing risks, and maintaining security through rigid adherence to carefully planned procedures. Prince Alexander's spontaneous compassion made every public appearance a security nightmare. The motorcade consisted of 3 armored vehicles, with the prince's car sandwiched between 2 escort vehicles filled with armed protection officers. As they made their way through London's busy streets, Blackwood reviewed the intelligence briefings on his tablet. There had been increased chatter on social media about anti-monarchy protests. Several groups had threatened to disrupt royal events. More concerning were the reports from MI5 about a potential security threat that remained frustratingly vague. Someone had been making inquiries about the prince's schedule, asking questions that suggested more than casual interest. The threat level had been raised from substantial to severe, meaning an attack was considered highly likely. Prince Alexander sat across from Blackwood in the armored Bentley, completely absorbed in reading get-well cards from children who wouldn't be able to attend the hospital visit. His genuine emotion, as he read each handwritten note, reminded Blackwood why this particular member of the royal family had captured the public's heart so completely. "Listen to this one, James," the prince said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's from a 7-year-old girl named Emma. She writes, 'Dear Prince Alexander, I have leukemia, but I'm not scared because my mummy says you care about kids like me. Will you tell the other sick children that they're brave like knights?'" Blackwood felt his professional detachment wavering as he watched the prince's reaction. Alexander wasn't just performing royal duties. He was genuinely moved by every story, every child's struggle. It made him vulnerable in ways that went far beyond physical security concerns. As they approached the hospital, Blackwood noticed something that immediately put him on high alert. A man in a hospital worker's uniform was positioned near the main entrance. But something about his posture and positioning didn't feel right. The man's eyes were scanning the street rather than focusing on hospital duties in his uniform, while correct looked too new and clean for someone actually working in a busy medical facility. "Detective Inspector Morrison," Blackwood spoke into his radio. "I need you to check the credentials of the hospital worker positioned at the main entrance. Something doesn't feel right." Morrison's voice crackled back through the earpiece. "Copy that, Captain. Running the check now." Prince Alexander, unaware of the developing situation, was reviewing his notes about the children he would be meeting. He had personally requested detailed information about each young patient, wanting to have meaningful conversations rather than generic royal pleasantries. This preparation was typical of his approach to royal duties, but it also meant he was completely absorbed in his work rather than paying attention to his surroundings. The motorcade slowed as they approached the hospital's circular drive. Blackwood's instincts, honed by years of military service in Afghanistan before joining the Royal Guard, were screaming that something was wrong. The suspicious hospital worker had been joined by two others, and their positioning created what looked like a tactical formation around the entrance. "Morrison, status on that credential check?" Blackwood's voice was tense. "Negative on all three, Captain." "Those aren't hospital employees." "Pete, those are not hospital employees." Blackwood's training kicked in immediately. He looked at Prince Alexander, who was still reading his notes, completely unaware that danger was approaching. In that moment, Captain James Blackwood faced a choice that would define the rest of his life and potentially save the life of the man he had sworn to protect. The royal protection protocols were clear and had been drilled into him countless times. In case of a potential threat, the prince was to remain in the armored vehicle while security teams neutralized the danger. Under no circumstances was the principal to be exposed to additional risk through deviation from established procedures. But Blackwood's gut told him that following standard protocol this time would be a fatal mistake. The men at the hospital entrance weren't just protesters or overzealous fans. Their positioning, their behavior, and their false credentials suggested something much more dangerous. If the motorcade continued to the planned entrance, they would be driving directly into what looked increasingly like a carefully planned ambush. The seconds stretched like hours as Blackwood processed the developing threat. His earpiece buzzed with urgent communications from the advanced security team. But the protocols they were following would take precious minutes to implement. Minutes that Blackwood instinctively knew they didn't have. "Your Royal Highness," Blackwood said firmly, causing Prince Alexander to look up from his notes with surprise. The captain's tone was completely different from his usual respectful deference. "We need to change the plan, now." Prince Alexander frowned, not understanding the urgency. "Change the plan?" "James, there are children waiting for us. Some of them have been looking forward to this visit for weeks. We can't just, sir, with respect, we're driving into danger." Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes locked on the prince's. "I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" The prince had never seen his protection officer look so intense, so focused. Something in Blackwood's expression made Alexander's casual attitude evaporate instantly. "What kind of danger? What's happening?" Instead of answering, Blackwood made a decision that violated every royal protection protocol ever written. He grabbed the emergency radio from the car's center console and spoke directly to the driver. "Stevens, do not proceed to the main entrance." "Repeat, do not proceed to the main entrance. Take the service road to the emergency department entrance immediately." The driver, confused by the deviation from the planned route, hesitated. "Captain, that's not the secured entrance. We haven't swept that area. Do it now, Stevens." A direct order. Detective Inspector Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, filled with alarm. "Blackwood, what are you doing? You're breaking protocol. The advance team hasn't cleared that route." Blackwood knew he was destroying his career with every word he spoke, but his instincts told him that following standard procedures would get the prince killed. "Morrison, those men at the main entrance aren't hospital workers." "How did they know?" "Exactly where we'd be arriving." "Someone leaked our security plans." Prince Alexander's eyes widened as the implications hit him. "You think there's been a security breach? Someone inside?" "I think we're about to find out, sir." Blackwood was already moving, pulling emergency gear from the car's hidden compartments. "Your Highness, I need you to put this on." He handed Alexander a lightweight bulletproof vest, disguised as a regular jacket. The prince started to protest. "James, this seems excessive. Maybe those men are just, sir, please." Blackwood's voice carried a tone of command that made Alexander realize this wasn't a discussion. "I've served in combat zones. I know what a setup looks like. Right now, my job isn't to follow the royal handbook. My job is to keep you alive." As their car diverted toward the emergency entrance, chaos erupted over the radio communications. The motorcade's sudden change of direction had triggered immediate confusion. Among the security teams positioned around the hospital, supervisors were demanding explanations, advanced teams were scrambling to adjust, and Morrison was threatening Blackwood with immediate suspension. Through it all, Blackwood remained focused on the task at hand. He was scanning the emergency department area through the car's bulletproof windows, looking for any signs of additional threats. His years of military experience had taught him that if one part of a security plan was compromised, the entire operation could be suspect. "Captain Blackwood?" Came a new voice over the radio. It was Commander Sarah Phillips, the head of Royal Protection Services. "You are in direct violation of established protocols. Explain your actions immediately." Blackwood took a deep breath. He was about to burn every bridge in his career, but he knew he was right. "Commander, I believe we have hostile actors positioned at the main entrance using false hospital credentials. I'm implementing emergency evasion procedures. Those procedures require authorization from ma'am. With respect, there isn't time for authorization. If I'm wrong, you can court me tomorrow. If I'm right and we follow standard protocol, the prince could be dead in the next 5 minutes." The silence that followed Blackwood's words was deafening. Everyone on the radio circuit understood the implications. If there really was a credible threat and they followed normal procedures, they would be driving the prince directly into danger. But if Blackwood was wrong, his career was over, and the carefully planned hospital visit would be ruined. Prince Alexander, who had been listening to the radio chatter with growing alarm, made his own decision. "Captain Blackwood is right to be cautious. I trust his judgment completely. Let's proceed with his plan." The prince's words carried enormous weight, but they also put Blackwood in an impossible position. If anything happened to Alexander while they were deviating from established security protocols, Blackwood would be held personally responsible, not just professionally but criminally. Protecting a member of the royal family was a sacred trust, and failure meant more than just losing a job. As they approached the emergency entrance, Blackwood saw confirmation of his worst fears. 2 more suspicious individuals were positioned near the ambulance bay, and they were clearly communicating with someone via hidden earpieces. The setup was becoming clear. Whoever was behind this had planned to attack the prince at multiple potential entrance points. "Stevens, don't stop at the emergency entrance either," Blackwood ordered. "Take us to the staff parking garage. We're going in through the basement." This latest change sent the radio communications into complete chaos. Multiple voices were shouting contradictory orders. Security teams were demanding clarification, and hospital administrators were asking why the royal visit was being completely rearranged without notice. But Blackwood had moved beyond caring about radio chatter or a chain of command. Every instinct he possessed was telling him that Prince Alexander's life was in immediate danger, and that following normal procedures would be fatal. He was operating on pure intuition now, the kind of battlefield awareness that had kept him alive in Afghanistan, and that he prayed would keep the prince alive today. The underground parking garage of London Children's Hospital was never meant to host a royal visit. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows between concrete pillars, and the air smelled of motor oil and disinfectant. But for Captain Blackwood, it represented safety from the trap he was certain had been laid above ground. "James, this is highly irregular," Prince Alexander said as their car came to a stop between 2 ambulances. Despite his words, the prince seemed more excited than concerned. "I've never entered a hospital through the basement before. Rather adventurous, don't you think?" Blackwood was checking his sidearm and scanning the garage for potential threats. "Sir, with respect, this isn't an adventure. If I'm correct about what's happening upstairs, we may have just saved your life." The radio crackled with increasingly frantic communications. Commander Phillips was demanding an immediate explanation. Detective Inspector Morrison was threatening to have Blackwood arrested for insubordination, and hospital security was reporting suspicious individuals at multiple entrances who seemed to be coordinating with each other. "All units be advised," came a new voice that made Blackwood's blood run cold. It was Inspector David Cromwell from Scotland Yard's counter-terrorism unit. "We've confirmed intelligence of a credible threat against Prince Alexander. Repeat, credible threat confirmed. All personnel are to consider this a potential terrorist incident. Prince Alexander's casual demeanor shifted immediately. The reality of what Blackwood had suspected was now being confirmed by the highest levels of law enforcement. Terrorist incident? The prince asked quietly. James, how did you know? I didn't know, sir. I suspected. Blackwood was already moving. Opening the car door and scanning the garage one more time. Your Highness, we're going to walk calmly to that service elevator. We'll take it directly to the children's ward and avoid all the main corridors where the threat might be positioned. Breaking protocol wasn't just about changing routes or ignoring radio communications. The Royal Guard operated under centuries of tradition that governed everything from how they stood to how they addressed the royal family. For Blackwood to take independent action without authorization was unprecedented. It's possibly treasonous and certainly career-ending. But as they walked across the garage, Prince Alexander did something that surprised everyone. Instead of demanding explanations or insisting on following proper procedures, he placed his hand on Blackwood's shoulder. Thank you for trusting your instincts, James. I'd rather be alive and break a few rules than dead and proper. The service elevator was cramped and slow, nothing like the grand entrances typically arranged for royal visits. As they rose through the hospital floors, Blackwood's radio continued to buzz with updates. The suspicious individuals at the entrance had been detained, and early reports suggested they were carrying weapons concealed in fake medical equipment. How many children are we visiting today? Prince Alexander asked, apparently unshaken by the news that someone had been planning to harm him. 14, sir, ages ranging from 4 to 16. Various conditions, but all stable enough for brief visits. Blackwood found himself oddly comforted by the prince's ability to focus on his duties even in the face of danger. When the elevator doors opened on the children's ward, they were greeted by Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of pediatric oncology. She looked confused and slightly flustered by their unexpected arrival. Your Royal Highness, we weren't expecting you through this entrance. The staff and children are all gathered in the main reception area. Change of plans, Dr. Blackwood interjected before the prince could speak. Security concerns require us to modify the visit. Can we arrange for the children to come to a smaller, more secure location? Dr. Mitchell's expression shifted as she began to understand the seriousness of the situation. Of course, Captain. You can use the family conference room. It's private and easily secured. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Blackwood noticed how naturally Prince Alexander interacted with everyone they encountered. He thanked janitors, asked nurses about their shifts, and stopped to admire artwork created by young patients that decorated the walls. Even under threat, the prince's genuine caring for others never wavered. The family conference room was small and unremarkable, with simple chairs arranged in a circle and children's drawings taped to the walls. It was nothing like the grand settings typically chosen for royal appearances, but Prince Alexander seemed delighted by its intimate atmosphere. This is perfect, he told Dr. Mitchell. Much better than some formal reception hall. The children will feel more comfortable here. Blackwood positioned himself near the room's only entrance, his hand resting casually near his weapon. Through the window, he could see London spreading out below them, unaware that a potential crisis was unfolding in their midst. Police sirens were audible in the distance, growing closer as the counter-terrorism response intensified. The first child to enter the room was a 6-year-old boy named Tommy, bald from chemotherapy but grinning with excitement. He had been told a special visitor was coming, but nobody had explained who it would be. When he saw Prince Alexander, his eyes went wide with amazement. Are you really a prince? I asked with the directness that only children possess. It really am, Alexander replied, kneeling down to Tommy's eye level. But more importantly, I hear you're incredibly brave. Fighting illness takes more courage than anything I've ever had to do. Blackwood watched this interaction while simultaneously monitoring the radio chatter in his earpiece. The situation outside was escalating rapidly. The individuals detained at the main entrance had been confirmed as members of a radical anti-monarchy group, and they had been carrying sophisticated weapons disguised as medical equipment. But in this small conference room surrounded by sick children and their families, a different kind of magic was happening. Prince Alexander was doing what he did best, bringing joy and hope to people who needed it most. And Blackwood realized that his decision to break protocol hadn't just potentially saved the prince's life. It had also preserved something much more important than security procedures. It had protected the prince's ability to be genuinely himself, to connect with people in the authentic way that made him beloved by millions. The full scope of the threat became clear as Blackwood listened to the radio updates while Prince Alexander continued his visit with the children.
Spectre.
Cromwell's voice cut through the static with chilling details. We've identified at least 8 individuals positioned throughout the hospital. This was a coordinated assassination attempt with multiple backup plans. Blackwood felt his stomach drop. His decision to change the route hadn't just avoided one potential threat. It had unknowingly disrupted an elaborate plot that had been months in the planning. The terrorists had anticipated multiple security scenarios and positioned themselves. Accordingly, they hadn't counted on a protection officer going completely off script. Prince Alexander was now sitting cross-legged on the floor with a group of young cancer patients, completely absorbed in a story one of them was telling. About her pet hamster. His genuine laughter filled the small room, and for a moment, it was easy to forget that people with weapons had been waiting to kill him just floors below. "Captain," came Commander Phillips' voice through his earpiece, "we need a full debrief. On your decision-making process, how did you identify the threat before our intelligence services?" It was a fair question, and one that Blackwood wasn't sure he could answer satisfactorily. "Ma'am, it was instinct more than intelligence. The positioning of the individuals, their behavior patterns, the way they were scanning for targets rather than performing hospital duties." What Blackwood didn't mention was the deeper truth. He had been watching Prince Alexander so closely for 3 months that he had developed an almost supernatural awareness of anything that might threaten him. The prince's safety had become more than a professional duty. It had become a personal mission that consumed his every waking moment. A 9-year-old girl named Sophie, who was recovering from a rare heart condition, had brought Prince Alexander a hand-drawn picture of a knight protecting a castle. "This is you," she explained seriously, "protecting all of us from the scary things." The prince accepted the drawing with genuine emotion, not knowing how prophetic the child's words were. At that very moment, police were arresting the last of the would-be assassins. Finding enough weapons and explosives to devastate the hospital's main lobby, where hundreds of patients, staff, and visitors would have been present during the attack. Blackwood's radio erupted with a new development that made his decision even more crucial. "All units, be advised that we've discovered explosive devices positioned at the main entrance. Bomb disposal is en route." If the motorcade had proceeded as planned, the explosion would have occurred during the prince's arrival. The weight of what had almost happened settled on Blackwood's shoulders like a physical force. His split-second decision to trust his instincts hadn't just prevented an assassination. It had likely saved dozens of innocent lives. The children and families gathered for the royal visit would have been caught in the blast. Along with hospital staff and random visitors, Dr. Mitchell approached Blackwood quietly, having overheard some of the radio communications. "Captain, should we end the visit? Should we evacuate the children?" Blackwood looked at Prince Alexander, who was now helping a teenage boy in a wheelchair demonstrate how to make paper airplanes fly farther. The pure joy on both their faces was remarkable, especially given the chaos unfolding throughout the rest of the building. "Doctor, the children are safer here with us than anywhere else in the hospital right now," Blackwood replied, "and I think the prince would refuse to leave them anyway." He was right about that. When Dr. Mitchell quietly explained the situation to Prince Alexander, his response was immediate and predictable. "These children have been dealing with life-threatening situations every day. The least I can do is stay with them during this one. Besides, they're the bravest people I know. I'm honored to be in their company." The terrorist threat had been neutralized, but the investigation was revealing disturbing details about how extensively the royal security system had been compromised. The attackers had obtained detailed information about the visit schedule, the planned route, and even the specific security measures that would be in place. Commander Phillips arrived at the hospital personally, bypassing the chaos at the main entrance to reach the children's ward. When she entered the conference room, she found a scene that perfectly captured why Prince Alexander was so beloved by the British people. He was sitting on the floor in his expensive suit, surrounded by sick children, leading them in a singing game while completely ignoring the fact that he had nearly been killed. Captain Blackwood, Commander Phillips said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately." Blackwood knew this conversation could result in his immediate arrest by breaking protocol, changing routes without authorization, and essentially taking command of a royal protection operation. He had committed offenses that could be considered treason under certain interpretations of the law. But as he looked at Prince Alexander, who was now teaching a group of children how to fold paper crowns, Blackwood felt no regret about his actions. Sometimes doing the right thing required breaking the rules, and sometimes protecting someone meant risking everything you had worked for. "Commander," he said quietly, "I'll accept full responsibility for my actions. But I need you to know that I would make the same decision again." The prince's safety had to come before procedures. Commander Phillips studied his face for a long moment, then looked at the scene before them. Prince Alexander had convinced the children to make paper crowns for all the nurses, and the room was filled with laughter and creativity that seemed to push back against all the darkness of the day. "Captain," she said finally, "we'll discuss your breach of protocol later. Right now, I need you to tell me exactly how you identified a threat that our advanced intelligence missed completely." The debriefing took place in the hospital administrator's office while Prince Alexander continued his extended visit with the children. Commander Phillips had assembled a team that included representatives from MI5 Scotland Yard's Counterterrorism Unit and the Royal Protection Service's Internal Affairs Division. Captain Blackwood sat across from them, knowing that his career hung in the balance. "Let's start from the beginning," Inspector Cromwell said, his notebook ready. "What exactly made you suspicious of the individuals at the main entrance?" Blackwood chose his words carefully. Their positioning was tactical rather than functional. Hospital workers don't station themselves in formation patterns. These individuals were positioned to control sight lines and escape routes, not to perform medical duties. But you made the decision to change routes before we confirmed they weren't hospital employees, Commander Phillips pointed out. That level of initiative is either brilliant intuition or dangerous recklessness. The truth was more complex than Blackwood could easily explain. During his 3 months protecting Prince Alexander, he had developed an almost obsessive attention to detail. He studied crowd behavior, memorized faces, and analyzed every environment they entered. Most protection officers focused on obvious threats, but Blackwood had learned to recognize the subtle signs that preceded danger. Commander, in Afghanistan, the difference between coming home and coming home in a box was often determined by split-second decisions based on incomplete information. You learn to trust your instincts because hesitation gets people killed. The MI5 representative, Agent Catherine Moore, leaned forward. "Captain, our investigation has revealed that this terrorist cell had inside information about the prince's schedule and security arrangements. Do you have any thoughts about how they might have obtained such detailed intelligence?" This was the question Blackwood had been dreading. His suspicions about the security breach went beyond just the attackers knowing the prince's schedule. The level of detail they possessed suggested someone with high-level access had been feeding them information for weeks or even months. "Agent Moore, I believe we need to examine everyone who had access to the planning for this visit. The terrorists knew not just when and where the prince would arrive, but also our specific security protocols and personnel assignments." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. If there was a mole within the Royal Protection Services, it meant that every future operation could be compromised. It also meant that Prince Alexander had been in danger not just today, but potentially for months without anyone realizing it. Detective Inspector Morrison, who had been largely silent during the debriefing, finally spoke up. "Captain Blackwood, I owe you an apology. I was so focused on maintaining protocol that I nearly missed the bigger picture. Your actions today likely saved not just the prince's life, but the lives of everyone who would have been in that lobby." The investigation was revealing the full scope of the planned attack. The terrorists had placed explosive devices at the main entrance timed to detonate during the prince's arrival. They had positioned snipers in buildings across from the hospital, and they had backup teams ready to pursue the motorcade if the initial attack failed. But Blackwood's unauthorized route change had disrupted every aspect of their plan. By taking the prince through the basement, he had not only avoided the immediate threat, but had also bought time for law enforcement to identify and neutralize the entire terrorist network. "There's something else," Agent Moore said, consulting her notes. "The terrorist communications we intercepted suggest they had been planning this for over 6 months. They knew about Prince Alexander's hospital visits, his preference for interacting directly with patients, and his tendency to extend visits beyond their scheduled times. This information hit Blackwood like a physical blow. The prince's compassionate nature, the very quality that made him so beloved by the public, had been weaponized against him. The terrorists had studied his personality and planned to use his goodness as a way to get close enough to kill him. Meanwhile, in the children's ward, Prince Alexander was creating memories that would last these young patients a lifetime. Unaware of the full scope of what had been planned against him, he was teaching a group of teenagers how to make origami flowers for their parents. His security detail had been quietly reinforced, but to the children, it just looked like their special visitor had brought more friends. Commander Phillips made a decision that would reshape royal protection forever. Captain Blackwood, effective immediately. You're being promoted to head of Prince Alexander's personal protection detail. Your willingness to break rules when necessary is exactly what we need to keep him safe. The promotion was unprecedented. Blackwood was relatively young for such a position, and his actions that day had technically been insubordinate. But the results spoke for themselves. By trusting his instincts over established procedures, he had prevented what could have been the most devastating attack on the royal family in modern history. "There's one more thing," Inspector Cromwell added, his expression grave. "Our investigation suggests this wasn't a random attack. The terrorists specifically chose Prince Alexander because of his public popularity and his hands-on approach to royal duties. They wanted to kill someone whose death would have maximum emotional impact on the British people." The weight of this revelation settled over everyone in the room. Prince Alexander wasn't just a target because of his royal status. He was targeted because of his humanity, his genuine care for others, and his refusal to maintain the distant formality that traditionally protected members of the royal family. Blackwood understood now that protecting Prince Alexander would require a completely new approach to royal security. Traditional protocols assumed that royals would maintain safe distances from the public and follow predictable routines. But Alexander's authentic connections, the people, were both his greatest strength and his greatest vulnerability. As the debriefing concluded, Blackwood realized that his decision to break protocol had changed more than just one day's events. It fundamentally altered how royal protection would operate going forward. And it had probably saved the life of a man whose genuine goodness had made him a target for those who wanted to destroy hope itself. 3 weeks after the failed assassination attempt, Captain James Blackwood stood in the same position outside Kensington Palace. But everything had changed. His promotion to head of Prince Alexander's protection detail came with new responsibilities, new protocols, and a completely different relationship with the man he was sworn to protect. The investigation had uncovered the full extent of the security breach that had made the attack possible. A senior clerk in the royal scheduling office had been feeding information to the terrorist cell for 8 months. Motivated by a combination of gambling debts and radicalized political beliefs, the betrayal cut deep through the royal protection services. Forcing a complete review of personnel vetting and information security, Prince Alexander had insisted on returning to his public duties immediately after the threat was neutralized, despite recommendations that he maintain a lower profile. While security procedures were being overhauled, "I won't let fear change how I serve the people," he had told the palace staff. "If I hide away, then the terrorists win, even though they failed." This attitude presented Blackwood with ongoing challenges that required constant innovation. Traditional royal protection relied on predictability and distance, but Alexander's effectiveness came from spontaneity and connection. Blackwood had to develop entirely new security methods that could protect the prince without stifling the qualities that made him so valuable to the monarchy and the nation. The media coverage of the thwarted attack had focused heavily on Blackwood's decision to break protocol. Editorial writers debated whether his actions represented heroic intuition or dangerous insubordination. Some critics argued that royal protection officers should never deviate from established procedures, regardless of circumstances. Others praised his willingness to prioritize results over rules, but the coverage that mattered most too. Blackwood came from an unexpected source. The children from the hospital had written thank you letters, not just to Prince Alexander, but to the guard, who kept the prince safe so he could visit us. A 10-year-old girl named Emma had written, "Thank you for being brave and smart. Prince Alexander told us that you saved him so he could keep helping sick kids like me." Prince Alexander himself had been characteristically gracious about the entire incident. During a private moment between his official duties, he had pulled Blackwood aside for a conversation that would stay with the captain forever. "James, I know what you risked for me that day," the prince had said. "Your career, your reputation, possibly your freedom. I want you to know that I understand the weight of what you did, and I'll never forget it." The prince paused, looking out the window at the gardens where tourists gathered daily, hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty. "But more than that, I want you to know that your decision has changed how I think about service. You showed me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is trust our conscience over our orders." This conversation had marked a turning point in their relationship. The formal distance required by royal protocol began to give way to something more like partnership. Blackwood was no longer just following the prince around. He was actively collaborating with him to find ways to maintain public engagement, while ensuring safety. The new security arrangements reflected this collaborative approach. Instead of simply restricting Prince Alexander's activities, Blackwood worked with him to design public appearances that could satisfy both his desire to help people and the security requirements of his position. They developed new protocols for hospital visits, charity events, and public walkabouts that maximize safety without sacrificing authenticity. Other members of the royal family began requesting Blackwood's involvement in their own security arrangements. His reputation for innovative thinking and willingness to adapt had spread throughout the palace. But he remained dedicated primarily to Prince Alexander, understanding that their partnership had become something unique in the history of royal protection. The long-term impact of that October day extended far beyond security procedures. The story of the guard who broke protocol to save the prince had captured the public imagination in ways that surprised everyone. Letters poured into the palace from ordinary citizens who had been inspired by Blackwood's courage and Prince Alexander's determination to continue serving despite the danger. A particularly moving letter came from a young soldier serving in Iraq. "Captain Blackwood," he wrote, "your story reminds me why we serve. Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules, and sometimes protecting what matters most requires risking what we value most." The terrorist trial that followed provided additional vindication for Blackwood's actions. The prosecution presented evidence that the attack would have succeeded if the prince had followed his original schedule. The terrorists had planned for every contingency except a protection officer, acting on pure instinct rather than established protocol. During his testimony, the lead terrorist made a statement that chilled everyone in the courtroom. "We studied the prince for months. We knew exactly how his security operated, exactly what they would do in every situation. The only thing we didn't plan for was someone ignoring their training." Prince Alexander attended every day of the trial, despite security concerns and palace recommendations that he stay away. He wanted to look into the faces of the people who had planned to kill him. It's not out of anger, but out of a desire to understand how hatred could drive people to such extremes. "I need to see them as human beings," he explained to Blackwood as they sat in the courtroom. "If I let them become monsters in my mind, then I'll start seeing monsters everywhere. I can't help people if I'm afraid of them." His attitude created new security challenges, but it also reinforced why Prince Alexander was worth protecting. His refusal to let the assassination attempt change his fundamental approach to his royal duties demonstrated a kind of courage that went beyond physical bravery. The hospital visit that had been interrupted by the attack was rescheduled and completed 6 weeks later. This time, the security was overwhelming, with multiple layers of protection and extensive advance preparation. But the most important element remained the same: Prince Alexander's genuine connection with the children who needed hope and joy in their difficult circumstances. Tommy, the 6-year-old who had asked if Alexander was really a prince, had completed his cancer treatment and was in remission. When the prince returned to visit, Tommy presented him with a hand-drawn picture of a guard standing in the rain. "This is Captain Blackwood," Tommy explained proudly. "He's a hero like the knights in my storybooks." Blackwood watched this exchange. From his position near the door, understanding that his decision on that October morning had created ripple effects that would continue for years to come. He had saved more than just one life. He had preserved the ability of a genuinely good person to continue making the world a little brighter for those who needed it most. Years later, when Blackwood retired from royal service, Prince Alexander spoke at his farewell ceremony. "James taught me that sometimes the highest form of loyalty is having the courage to do what's right rather than what's expected. He showed me that true service means protecting not just someone's life, but their ability to live that life with purpose and meaning." The story of the guard who broke all the rules to save the prince became part of royal protection training, a reminder that sometimes the most important decisions can't be found in any manual or protocol. It demonstrated that protecting those who serve others requires more than just following orders. It requires the wisdom to know when breaking those orders serves a higher purpose. And in the children's ward of London Hospital, a small plaque was installed near the conference room where Prince Alexander had taken shelter. It read simply, "Sometimes courage means breaking the rules to protect what matters most." The children who read it understood better than most adults exactly what those words meant.